The death sentence of Nicholas Sutton was executed by means of electrocution on February 20th, 2020, in accordance with the laws of the state of Tennessee. The sentence was carried out here at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. Mr. Sutton was pronounced dead at 7:26 p.m. I will read a statement now from the sister of victim John Large. I will read her statement as written. A statement from Amy Large Cook. I would first like to thank all of my friends and family for all the years of support. My parents were so grateful for all of the thoughts and prayers, and I am as well. My prayers are also with the other victims' families today. I hope that they will be able to have peace and closure. I don't know that I will ever have complete closure, but like a friend of mine said, at least that chapter will be over. I wish my parents and John's wife could be here with me today. I know they are in spirit, but it is a blessing that they don't have to go through the anguish of reliving the gruesome details of John's murder on a daily basis. John was denied the opportunity to live a full life with a family of his own. My children were denied meeting a wonderful man who would have spoiled them rotten and loved them with all his heart. He suffered a terrible and horrific death, and for that I will never forgive Mr. Sutton. I would like to thank my God for carrying me through this horrific ordeal. My parents' love and trust in him got them through the worst times of their lives. I especially want to thank my husband Dwayne, my beautiful children Ashton and John for their love and never-ending support. They have been my rock. Also, I want to thank the Tennessee State Attorney General's office and their amazing staff for being a huge support in the last few years. They have handled every situation with grace, class, and professionalism. Finally, thank you to all the reporters I interviewed with. All of them were very caring and graceful with their questions. If anything good came from this, I feel blessed with the new friends I feel I've made with them. Statement of Amy Large Cook, sister of victim John Large. We will now hear from media witnesses to the execution, followed by the attorney for Mr. Sutton.
My name is Travis Lawler. I'm a reporter with the Associated Press. We were seated in a darkened room next to the execution chamber at 7:12. A blind covering the windows between us and the chamber went up, and Mr. Sutton was already seated in the electric chair, strapped in. He was asked for any last words, and he had a fairly lengthy statement that I did not get every word down. Some other the reporters might have gotten parts that I didn't. But he said, I would like to thank my wife for being such a good witness to the Lord, and for my family and many friends for their love and support as they tried so very hard to save my life. He said, don't ever give up on the power of Jesus Christ to take impossible situations and correct them. He's fixed me. And he said, I'm just grateful to be a servant of God, and I'm looking forward to being in his presence. And then two of the officers placed the helmet on his head and a shroud over his face. Then at 7:18, the first bolt of electricity was administered, and he rose partially from the chair, and one of his hands balled up into a fist, and then the other one, I think, slowly began to ball up as well. There was a brief pause where his body relaxed, and then a second jolt of electricity. And then the curtains were drawn after a minute, and he was pronounced dead at 7:26.
There were some reports of the last execution on steam or smoke coming out of the headpiece. Is there any evidence of that this time?
I did not see anything like that. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Matthew Torres. I'm a reporter for WTVF News Channel 5 here in Nashville. Just to echo what she says, prior to 7/12, all of us media witnesses were placed into this room, completely dark except seeing the glow from the phone and maybe the sliver of light peeking through the door and the window just underneath the curtain there. We heard some noise happening on the other side of the wall. Again, we see the window, and then we heard eventually some walking, some talking, and eventually the speaker coming on saying sound check, and the officer responding with us inside the room saying loud and clear. And then at that point we hear another door close fairly loud. Then we can still hear now the chains, what sounds unraveling or dropping to the floor. Again, we were still on the other side. The curtains were still closed, and at that moment, well, prior to that, we saw the prisoner chaplain coming into the room, and then as soon as we heard those chains, eventually the attorney of Mr. Sutton walked in, and then at 7:12, the curtains raised. You immediately see his face, clearly not the same from the pictures that we have seen him before, according to the protocol. Had shaved, clean shaven as well. He was wearing the normal attire, the cream looking attire, cloth material clearly. It went up to his knees, and strapped, I could see at least 6 maybe from the chair strapped around him. He was looking straight towards us, a pretty solemn face, sad face. You saw the 2 officers in their uniform standing on opposite sides of him. 2 other officers, I don't know the correct term, but they were wearing suits. One closer to the window, one to the side of the wall, standing near an orange mat where there is a cable that he eventually plugged into a box which connected to the chair. And at that point, that's when the electricity or the jolt came through. By 6:15, we heard some exhaust fan from what it sounds like. But prior to that, the 2 officers were squeezing out the saltwater mixture with this fairly large sponge that they squeezed under this leather cap, which looked like a helmet from the early 1900s. And there was a sponge wrapped around both of his ankles. When it was strapped, you saw them squeezing out bottles of the mixture into those sponges. And at some point by 7:16, from my count, that is by 7:18, that's when the electricity came through. It doesn't seem like he completely went off the chair, but his body lifted fairly for about 20 seconds, came down 15 seconds, and then went back up. For my count, within the 15-second mark, you see his fingers kind of curled towards him, still on the arms of the chair. But by the second time they ran through the electricity, there wasn't as much tension the second time around. And from there, eventually, we just watched him for a good 5 minutes before another officer came in and closed the curtain.
Could you talk a little more about his demeanor beforehand? A lot of times, some witnesses have said, reported grimacing or wincing as the salt water being dripped down. Can you talk about just his demeanor beforehand and anything that he might have done like that?
He didn't express much emotion, just looked straight ahead, and I mean, as the sponge was over his head, he was looking maybe at one of the officers as it was dripping down his face, clearly drenched the top of his attire, but overall he just looked straight ahead. That's something that I think I will remember, kind of the look of not necessarily emptiness, but clearly, at least for me, it looked like he just knew what his fate was. And just to echo what a previous colleague said, he said, "I want to thank my wife for being such a good witness to the Lord. I want to thank my family and friends for love and support as they try so hard to save my life," continuing to say, "Don't ever give up on the power of Jesus Christ to take impossible situations and correcting them," ending along the lines of, "I want to uplift the name of Jesus Christ, my Lord of Lords, King of Kings," and then something else.
Good evening. My name is John North, and I'm a journalist with WBIR Television in Knoxville. I'll keep my remarks brief. Just a couple observations. First of all, within 2 minutes, basically, of the jolts hitting him, he stopped moving. As Matthew said, his fingers did clench. That was it. He didn't move after that, but we sat for probably, I would guess, 8 minutes, waiting to see whether he would move at all. I saw no smoke. I was looking for that as well. I saw nothing at all, as a matter of fact. I was struck by, he did invoke God and the Lord a lot. I had talked to a friend of his earlier tonight who said similar things, who had communicated with him, so I was struck by that. The words I'm going to remember that he always said were the last words: "I'm just grateful to be a servant of God and looking forward to being in His presence." I think that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. I was struck by how directly he looked at us, as well he could, until they put the saline solution on him, and then I think he mostly closed his eyes. It would be hard to look at anybody if you've got that stuff dripping in your eyes. Any questions?
Could you talk about his demeanor as much as you were able to make out before the shroud came on?
Certainly. I think that he appeared very firm to me. I'll be honest with you, when they raised the blinds, unlike the Billy Irick execution where he was laying down on a gurney, Mr. Sutton was looking straight at us. So the minute the blinds were pulled up, boom, there he is. It's a very stark room. There's hardly anything in there. It's a very bright white light. And we were looking straight at him, and he was looking straight at us. And then, as I say, once they began to put all the equipment on that they needed to go through with the execution, he was not looking at us so more. He was looking down, or he was closing his eyes.
When he said those last words, was it stuttered all, or was it very calm? How did he speak?
For me, as far as I'm concerned, it was very deliberate the way he stated it. He said it with great purpose.
Could you tell us just from your notes what he said? Because I know it was a very long statement.
It really was long, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm like Travis. I couldn't keep up with all of it, Travis Lawler. He started off talking about thanking his wife and his family for all their support. Then he sort of shifted into talking about the importance of God and the Lord and Jesus, and how Jesus can make things better. He can fix wrongs. I assume he was referring to himself having found God as he was in prison, that kind of a thing. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Paul Miles. I'm the correspondent with the Tennessee Radio Network. I'll just make some brief remarks and add to what they said. Let me begin by saying I witnessed a previous electrocution, and this was as expected. I saw nothing unusual tonight. Everything was what I expected it to be. Saw no steam, no smoke during the entire execution, and I looked specifically for that the entire time. Saw no resistance from the inmate, Mr. Sutton. He seemed resigned to what was about to happen. And also, during the execution, during those several minutes of the execution process, the warden of the institution and his two staff members, I noticed, stood at attention off to the sides during the entire time, in what I thought was a very professional, dignified manner.
Paul, you mentioned the other execution you've seen in the state of Kentucky, is that right?
Yes.
So can you talk about any differences that you noticed between the two?
The only difference between those, between watching an execution in Kentucky and here in Tennessee, is that in the other state, you watch the whole process. You see the inmate being brought into the chamber and strapped to the chair to see if there was any resistance, or the demeanor of the inmate. You don't see that here until the drapes are opened and the inmate's already in the chair, strapped, and the execution is about to begin.
How is his demeanor maybe different from the other one you witnessed?
Not much. Both seem very resigned to the fact about, they seem prepared. And as they mentioned, the statement that he gave was long and very deliberate, as if he was had thought about it for a long time.
My name is Travis Dorman. I'm a reporter with the Knoxville News Sentinel. I don't have a lot to add. When the blinds opened up, we saw Nick Sutton sitting there. He had a frown on his face, I would say. He did have make deliberate eye contact with us. I looked right at him. When they put the sponge on his head, water dripped down his face. He closed his eyes. His eyes were closed for the rest of the time. His last words were, it was pretty lengthy. Beyond that, I was struck by the fact that Mr. Sutton was convicted of killing 4 people, but no one was sitting in the room that is reserved for family members of the victims. Amy Large Cook, the only woman who came tonight, was not allowed to watch the execution because Mr. Sutton was sentenced to death for a different killing. So that struck me as unusual, and the prison officials said that it was as well. Other than that, I don't think I have anything to say that hasn't already been said, so if you have any questions, I'll answer them.
I'm Natalie Allison. I'm a reporter with the Tennessean. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we learned about Nick Sutton's day leading up to this evening. He was served Holy Communion at 3:30 today. He was served that by the prison chaplain. His name is Dr. Eduardo Roca, as well as Mr. Sutton's spiritual advisor. He was given Welch's grape juice and a wafer, and that was about half an hour before he was served his last meal. So communion at 3:30, and the last meal just before 4 p.m. His defense attorney, Steve Farrell, also met with Mr. Sutton. He told us shortly before 6 p.m., maybe around, he came back into the waiting room with us around 5:45, and declined to comment on what was said during that meeting. And he also was able to share a few words with Mr. Sutton just before the execution took place, when he and Steve Sutherland from the Attorney General's office were in the room as Nick Sutton was being strapped in, which is something that we weren't able to see. TDOC also told us that he had requested that none of his family come. In recent weeks, we were told by Dorinda Carter, Mr. Sutton stated a few weeks ago he did not want his family here. So not only were they not here to witness the execution, but from what we understand, he didn't want them to come visit him in the last few weeks as well. They've gone over really the breakdown of what happened in the execution room. One thing I'll add is that, according to my notes, he read his lengthy statement thanking his wife and invoking his Christian faith. But his last words after he said, I'm just grateful to be a servant of God, and I'm looking forward to being in his presence. And his final last words were, and I thank you. And as they've mentioned, he was looking at us. So I'm not sure exactly who he was thanking there at the very end, but that was after he had thanked his family and friends, of course, for all of their support. He was barefoot during the execution. I know in the execution protocol that I've read, it says that inmates are given cloth house shoes or a pair of socks to wear. I don't know if that was his decision or not, but he was barefoot during the execution. I think everyone else has covered pretty much everything else. The prison chaplain, Dr. Roca, was in the execution viewing room with us, as was Steve Sutherland with the Attorney General's office, and Steve Farrell, his public defender.
Was it Mr. Farrell that told you the information about the communion that you talked about?
No, that was TDOC who told us that he was served Holy Communion today. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Bob Moore. I'm a reporter for the Citizen Tribune newspaper in Morristown, Tennessee, where John Large lived, where Dorothy Sutton lived, and where Nicky Sutton lived. I guess the thing that impressed me the most is all the pictures you see of Nicky Sutton. He's a tough guy. And he was a tough guy, and he was a violent guy. And he was violent from a young age. but with his head, with his hair sheared, he just looked older. I wouldn't have recognized him, and he certainly didn't look menacing. Older, and all of the menacing persona that he had from an early age, I just didn't see it there. And beyond that, what these people said about what he said, it's a better representation than I could make. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Farrell. I was Nick Sutton's attorney, and I'm not going to be taking any questions. I merely want to read a statement that Mr. Sutton prepared that he asked me to read for him. He said, "I have made a lot of friends along the way, and a lot of people have enriched my life. They have reached out to me and pulled me up, and I am grateful for that. I've had the privilege of being married to the finest woman who is a great servant to God. Without her, I would have not made the progress that I made. I hope I do a much better job in the next life than I did in this one. If I could leave one thing with all of you, it is don't ever give up on the ability of Jesus Christ to fix someone or any problem. He can fix anything. Don't ever underestimate his ability. He has made my life meaningful and fruitful through my relationships with family and friends. So even in my death, I am coming out a winner. God has provided it all to me. Thank you."
This concludes our press conference. Thank you. Please remember there will be no interviews with staff at all, nor will there be permitted any interviews with official media witnesses here on property. You'll have 1 hour from this time to conduct your business, and then at that point you'll need to vacate the premises, and there will be no broadcast permitted for the next 72 hours as the facility will be on lockdown. Thank you.